Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unraveling Politics. In this show, we discuss the big political news of the week, and I bring it to you in a way that hopefully everyone can understand. So, the big issues of the week, last week, were Trump's criminal trial, which is nearing its conclusion. There were also some updates on the border situation, and we have some news about the war in Israel and Gaza. So, okay, I got my whole list of stuff here. So, firstly, I want to talk about the bipartisan border bill. As you can see in the title, the bipartisan border bill has died again. It failed in a vote 43 yes to 50 no and 7 abstentions. Nearly all of Republicans voted against it. And let me say the story of the bipartisan border bill. In the fall of 2023, moderate senators like Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin proposed a $20 billion proposal to increase restrictions and enforcement on the border. Trump put pressure on his party and told them to kill the bill, which they did. It would have let up to 5,000 migrants in per day, which is 1.8 million a year. Even the authors of the bill voted against it this time, even though progressives like Cory Booker and LaFonza Butler, a senator from California, voted no. Speaker Johnson also said the bill would have never passed the House. So this is something I was thinking about recently. The border is a very highly charged issue. It really has been ever since Trump ran for president 9 years ago. And that's something that Republicans have been running on. I don't anticipate, even if Republicans get into power with a huge majority and they could get anything done, which is pretty unlikely, they're not going to do that, then they will probably not fix the border because they prefer to run on the border as an issue. They prefer to use it as just an issue to constantly campaign on and never actually solve. And the Democrats are not immune from doing this either. I think abortion is something the Democrats will forever run on. How do I know that? Because when they overturned Roe v. Wade, they had a couple of months to work with moderate Republicans to do a 12 or 15-week abortion limit, and they chose not to. They didn't take advantage of the opportunity. They preferred to run in the midterms on it, and they did pretty successfully, even though they lost the majority in the House. They didn't do very bad. The red wave never materialized. So I don't anticipate much changing of the border after the election because the border has been an issue for years. Even President Clinton wanted to work on the border, but they never did. So it's been a big problem. Hopefully it gets fixed, but I don't think it will. So speaking of the border, for the first 21 days of May, 3,700 migrants were encountered every day. And that was just for that was on average. That's just for 21 days in May. That's, believe it or not, down 54%. But 3,700 is still 1.3 million people a year. Asylum is also a separate number, which is 1,500 a day. So if you add both of them together, that's 1.8 million people. There's still 1.8 million people being encountered at the border again. So it has dropped for the last 3 consecutive months because it was 8,000 a day in December. Moderate Democrats in the GOP want tougher restrictions on immigration, and meanwhile progressives are mad that Biden has kept Trump-era policies. So Biden has really kind of screwed himself over with the border, as he has done with a lot of things, and that's really bad for him because you think Arizona is a big swing state. I do think Arizona has a decent chance of going to Trump, even though I think Biden will win the election. Arizona has a decent chance of going for Trump for that reason, as well as all the other reasons like the economy and inflation, which I guess is part of the economy. It's going to be an interesting dynamic to look. It is awfully convenient that border crossings are falling leading toward the election. Usually they rise in the spring and summer, and then they drop in the fall and winter, if I remember correctly. So this is going to be really, as I said, this has been a real problem for the Biden administration. If they're not able to get tough on the border, then they should, then they're going to feel the wrath of the voters, especially in Arizona. And the border does affect everybody. I've known people who have said, like, oh, well, how does the border affect me? Well, it does affect you because these people will have to go all over the country. In fact, they have been all over the country. We have had 8 million border encounters in the last 3.5 years. Actually, it might even be 9 million. And 2 million of them were deported. So that means 6 to 7 million have been let into the country. And that's really, really bad, because these are people who are they're legal in that they're allowed to be here, but they're awaiting for trial. It's clogging our immigration system. It is not fair to people who want to come here and they came here the right way. It's not fair. And I would advise, if I was Trump, I would say to Trump, you need to focus on one big issue when you become president, or if you become president. I would say you got to focus on one issue, because usually presidents can only get 1 or 2 things done. I would tell Mr. President, I would say you need to do one of 2 things. You should either focus on, if you're going to do tax cuts, that's all you're going to get done in your first year. If you want to do tax cuts, do tax cuts. If you're going to do the border. He's probably going to do tax cuts because the tax cuts will expire in 2025. So those are or 2020, at the end of 2025. So those are probably the more, I guess, urgent thing. But I would advise Trump to focus on the border. Anyway, speaking of Trump, Nikki Haley has said she will be voting for Trump, which to me did not come as a huge surprise, but she also said Trump was not mentally competent. So that's kind of amazing. You say someone's not competent to be president, but you'll still vote for them, which is, I guess, only in the 2024 can that happen, considering both sides are kind of like that. Trump also said that he had some interesting comments on birth control this past week. Trump said he was going to look at limits to contraceptions, and he said he would have a policy upcoming and he would likely leave it to the states. But it seemed like he was mixing that with the abortion pill. It seems like he's okay with contraception being legal nationwide. It's the abortion pill he wants to limit. So that could be, I'm surprised that hasn't been as damaging as people thought it was going to be. But Trump really needs to watch his mouth. I don't know if it was a slip-up or if it's a sign of cognitive decline. I do think Trump is in cognitive decline. Definitely not as bad as Biden, but I think Trump needs to be evaluated and probably, maybe even, just like Biden, be removed from the ballot. They're clearly not competent. And of course the Biden campaign, they jumped on it. They said, as including Vice President Harris, they were saying that this is what Trump's going to do. He's going to limit contraception. Of course, I don't know how Trump could do that, because in Griswold v. Connecticut, that was the Supreme Court case, I think, in the 60s, they said that married couples have the right to buy contraception. I think that extends to everybody. It's part of the right to privacy. As for Trump's trial, the defense brought up one witness to the stand. The goal of the witness was to destroy Michael Cohen's credibility. Cohen admitted to stealing $30,000 from the Trump Organization. Robert Costello, who advised Michael Cohen after he'd been raided by the FBI in 2018, noted that he was manic, suicidal, and crazy. He said that Michael Cohen said, "My life is shattered. My family's life has been shattered. I really want you to explain to me what my options are. What's my escape route?" Michael Cohen told Costello that he did it on his own and that Trump doesn't have anything, and that he doesn't have anything on Donald Trump. Prosecutors objected to testimony, and the jury was taken out of the room after Costello didn't like one of the judge's rulings. The defense rested their case. Trump did not testify. He was once eager to testify, and he was not called on. The jury will return on the 20... I got 2 things here. The trial is supposed to resume on Tuesday, May 28th, so that's tomorrow, and closing arguments will be the next week. The jury will return on the 29th, so... okay, here we go, I'm sorry. The jury will return on the 29th, but the closing arguments will be during that week, the week of Tuesday, May the 28th. So the Trump trial we could have a verdict by the end of next week, which is kind of scary, but it's true. So, yeah, we're going to find out. We could have our first president our first presidential nominee convicted of what would be a felon, a convicted felon. So that would be, that's really scary. I do think Trump is going to get off. I don't think the case is very strong. And from what I've heard, the statute of limitations, it may have already expired on this. So, and the reason why they couldn't prosecute while Trump was president was because he was president. When you're sitting president, you can't be indicted. All right. I also noticed this week we learned there will be an election in the UK. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has called an early general election. The election was expected to take place in the autumn, but instead it will be taking place at the beginning of July. In fact, it will be held on the 4th of July. So why does this matter for us Americans? Well, the ruling Conservative Party, which has been in power for 14 years, is well behind in the polls. They're in fact over 20 points. They might even be more. And it looks like the opposition Labour Party will be in power, and the Labour Party is obviously on the left. They are more likely to support Biden, and if they win, which it looks like they will, there could be some more cross-Atlantic cooperation between Biden and the Labour leader. That is going to be something to watch out for, because if you think about it, Rishi Sunak has presided over a time of high inflation, just like Biden, high energy prices. And since this is their first election since 2019, the Conservatives have also ruled over during COVID, and that was when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. So they went from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak all in less than a few years. So that's going to be really important, because we're going to see how will voters in England, Scotland, and Wales, who are not all that different from us. They even, from what I hear, some of them even celebrate the 4th of July, which is kind of bizarre. That would be like Nazis celebrating victory, or Germans celebrating VE Day in Europe. And so that's going to be important, because we're going to get to see how the electorate can respond to leaders who have had high inflation. Of course, there's differences, because they've had a lot more chaos and turmoil, and also the Conservatives have been in power for 14 years. All right, another thing I have in here is the ICC is seeking the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, for crimes against humanity and other war crimes. Israel's defense minister and 3 Hamas leaders have also been targeted. So this is not an exhaustive arrest. There could be more things coming. The warrant hasn't officially been issued, but it could be. So this is going to be a problem for Netanyahu, because if an arrest warrant is issued, he's not going to be allowed to go to any countries that submit to the ICC, which would be most of Europe, South America, Asia, and Africa. The U.S. does not submit to the International Criminal Court, I think is what they're called. So it's going to be a problem for him, because it's going to limit what he can do, where he can travel and get support. He's still going to be able to come here, though, and that is going to be a problem for him and Biden. Israel's clearly being strangled diplomatically. They're being more and more isolated as time goes on. And support for a Palestinian state continues to grow. In fact, several countries like Spain and Norway have now recognized the Palestinian state. Most of the world has, except the US, Canada, I think Australia, and parts of Europe. So, the arrest warrant has not been issued. There was one issued against Putin, so they got to submit it first. And then Putin's was issued 21 days later. So it could take a couple weeks, it could take a couple of months. But I think regardless, it's not going to change much. U.S. policy is probably going to continue, other than what I already said. U.S. policy is probably going to continue. We're going to continue to support Israel. We've had ironclad support for Israel. Trump and Biden are pretty much in agreement for the most part. Our politicians and our parties tend not to differ on foreign policy issues very much. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it doesn't really impact Americans as much. And two, you have to be really careful, because if you have a government leading up to an election and you have an opposition party that is undermining you with conflicting opinions or conflicting policies, that can really, as I said, undermine your position, and it could weaken what you're trying to do. So, for example, say Biden was the president, which he is, and we knew Trump was going to win in a landslide. Like, it was guaranteed Trump is going to win, super popular, and Trump was saying, like, oh, we're gonna do this for Israel, we're gonna support Israel, we're gonna give them all this money, blah blah blah, and we knew Trump was going to win. that would undermine Biden's ability to be able to hold Israel to account for some of the things they've done, because then they would just know the next guy is gonna, in a couple of months, is gonna take over. So that's one of the reasons. I would like to see more. That being said, I would like to see some more differences on foreign policy, because a lot of our foreign policy has been interventionist, bigger military, more intervention in countries that are not around. We really have been the global policeman for the last 60 years, maybe even longer, since World War II. So that is something I'd like to see, and I think most people agree. However, most people don't vote on foreign policy issues. If there was a choice between a candidate they like on foreign policy versus a candidate they like on domestic policy, they're almost always going to win on domestic policy. So I think for voters, Gaza is not going to be as big of an issue as inflation in the economy has been. Now, it's not saying it's not important. People might have their opinions swayed, like if they're evenly split between two candidates, and then they like somebody on foreign policy better, that could swing their opinion. But it's not going to be something. Nobody is a single issue voter. Well, I don't want to say nobody, but most people are not single issue voters based on just economic issues. Alright, another thing I want to mention is the Federal Reserve had their meeting, and they said they are considering raising rates. Some members brought it up. Now, how would this affect people? Obviously, higher rates would be more pain for households. It would be higher credit card bills. If you have a varied mortgage, it would be higher mortgages. It would make the housing market even more unaffordable. Our national debt would continue to go up, and it would cause huge strain for a lot of people. And here's the thing, interest rates are not even very high historically. They're high for the last 15 years. They're the highest actually in 21 years. But they were much, much higher in the 80s and 90s. So people are just not used to. I think it shows just our economy is a lot weaker than it was back then, because even with interest rates at 5%, lots of people are still struggling. So it's pretty unlikely, I would say, at this point that we're going to see any interest rate cuts this year. Maybe after the election. And in that case, that wouldn't affect Biden or Trump, the election, but it would really cause not having lower rates. In fact, raising rates would really cause a lot of issues for people. So it'd be good if you already have money, because that means you can get higher money through your savings. But it would not. Most people are not in that situation. All right. Lastly, I know I already mentioned this a little bit, but I wanted to circle back on it. As Jen Psaki says, Nikki Haley is backing Trump. Biden is wooing her supporters. Biden is running on democracy, like, I will protect democracy, I'll defend democracy, which is really ironic, because Biden has actually, I would say, in almost as much as Trump, undermined democracy by issuing a vaccine mandate and issuing a federal mask mandate on planes, trains, and buses. He has also tried to circumvent the Supreme Court by forgiving student loans, and Congress, circumventing Congress. So Biden really has been, I would say Biden has been really, I won't call him a dictator, but I'll say he's definitely more authoritarian than he'll admit, arresting pro-lifers that protest outside people's homes while letting people who are pro-choice, like, nearly kill Brett Kavanaugh outside his house. It's been a real, the Biden administration has been really a lot worse than they'll say, and I think a lot of people are quick to forget about COVID, but as somebody who was in high school during COVID was such a formidable time in my life. It's probably not anything I'll ever forget, and I'll tell you, my politics changed a lot between those years. I think if you go back to the fall of 2019, I believed a lot different things than I do now because of that and the way that government abused their power during COVID. Lastly, Nikki Haley will not be Trump's vice president. That's been ruled out by Trump. In fact, Trump called her a bird brain. So, this is somebody that worked together with her. They worked together. It's not good to have a party this divided. The Republicans are really divided against Trump. Democrats are not as divided on Biden. Okay, So that's all I have for today. I hope if you're watching this on Memorial Day, I hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day. If you are watching this after, I hope you had a wonderful Memorial Day, and I will see you again in the first week of June. Thank you for listening.